Hey everyone! Quick heads up. This one's a doozy. I'm about to tell you the story of how my husband tried to impress his side chick with our money, and how I quietly turned their romantic evening into his absolute worst financial nightmare. Stay with me. It gets deliciously awkward. I should start by saying I never wanted to be the kind of person who plots revenge like a daytime soap opera. I always like to believe I'm rational, boringly reasonable even. Pay the bills on time. Keep the calendar synced, remind people where the spare keys are. My friends joke that I'm the CFO of our household, which, in a way, I was. I handled the budget, paid the mortgage, knew the passwords to the streaming services, coordinated the holiday gift lists, and yes, had the app that let me freeze or cancel cards with one thumb, because I have a borderline unhealthy love for financial control. It's practical, also fun. His name's Ryan. We'd been married almost 10 years. There were years of good, weird mutual fandoms, lazy Sunday breakfasts where he'd burn the pancakes but eat them with pride, vacations where we argued about which souvenir was tacky. He was charming in the way that made you forgive late nights. And bad puns. He had that company guy vibe. Button-downs, half-hidden tattoos, an enthusiasm for craft beer and golf weekends he never actually went on. He was the kind of man who believed a good cufflink could solve an awkward social situation. There were also smaller things I learned to live with. An aversion to grocery lists, a taste for impulse online shopping, and a theatrical, slightly dramatic love life that somehow required public affirmation. He liked to be seen. That was fine, until it wasn't. For years, I chalked his late nights up to work stuff. I'd notice cologne I didn't buy on his jacket and make a joke about him, trying to be seductive at 2 a.m. on a conference call. I knew how to read the small things, phone left face down, texts that buzzed and were deleted too quickly, his suddenly rigorous exercise schedule. But I also know how paranoid people can be. The internet will tell you to trust your partner, to assume the best. I tried. I really did. I didn't want to be the woman who rifled through someone else's life. Then there was the night I saw the pattern. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was accumulation. Receipts for dinners at hip new restaurants, dinner reservations he forgot to tell me about, a $600 dress charge that he swore was for a work event. The pattern made sense only when you saw how the little things fit. He was building a persona. For someone else. He was curating an experience he wanted to be admired for. He wanted to be looked at the way he'd looked at me on our wedding day, but the woman across from him wasn't me. I don't know when the suspicion hardened into certainty. Maybe the night his phone lit up with Maya, and then the screen went black before I could see anything. Maybe it was the way he started calling his hairstylist by accident. Maybe it was the passive-aggressive perfume receipt left in the laundry basket. All small evidence, but enough to make a woman listen to her instincts. I did the thing everyone says not to do. I stared. For 2 nights, I watched a corner of our bed like it was a crime scene. But I didn't snoop through his phone. Not the way some people might imagine, digging, scrolling, gaslighting myself into seeing patterns where none existed. There's paranoia, and there's having a job. I ran numbers, patterns, and timelines the way I ran budgets. It was what I did. I looked at bank statements. I knew his corporate card habits, the way his coffee runs always hit the same place at 8:45 a.m., the way he favored smaller, impulsive purchases. I'd been the one to set up spending alerts. I'd been the one to get the joint account set up in a way that let me keep an eye, call it being fiscally responsible or call it being nosy, depending on how generous you're feeling. The reason this worked in my favor was boring but true. I was the one who handled our main accounts. I paid the mortgage, which meant I had all the login info. Over the years, I'd taught Ryan how to come to me when a card got declined and how to make sure subscriptions were in his name. He liked the independence of being on his own card, but he also loved not having to call the bank. I set up his cards to be associated with the joint account as a convenience. That convenience became my tool. You should know that for months I collected things. Not because I'm vindictive, though that part of me certainly exists, but because the right kind of evidence is a kind of safety. Screenshots of conversations, no graphic sex, just a pattern of promises and dates, little transaction notifications, a picture he'd sent of wine by the window that matched an Instagram story with a different location tag. Sometimes the only honest way to prove to yourself you're not crazy is to make a neat file labeled "not ridiculous." Mine had subfolders, receipts, texts, bank. I felt ridiculous doing it. I felt powerful doing it. Both things can be true. The thing about men who cheat is they're not always slick. They're careless when they believe you're absent-minded. That's how I caught him. He was careless. It all came to a head one Thursday evening. I was at my usual Pilates class, my attempt at being a functioning adult, and I glanced at my phone during the cool down. A push notification. Pending. Balthazar Bistro, $418. Balthazar was not our regular. Ryan rarely spent that much on dinner unless it was for a client, and he's never had clients that involved candlelight. A little curiosity is healthy. I texted, "Who is Balthazar?" He replied within minutes, "Oh, work dinner with Ed." Ed, the coworker, was a lie so neat it practically had a bow. My brain cataloged it as an explanation. My instincts read it as an alibi. I deleted a sassy reply. I chose the calmer route. I opened the bank app. I didn't have to hack anything. This was the stuff of shared responsibility. I'd been the one who signed up for the Manage Cards feature so I could pause cards during travel. It was meant to prevent fraud and accidental charges from late-night impulse buys. Again, strategically practical. On the app, I could see his card used to authorize multiple charges that week. A boutique jewelry store Saturday night, a boutique floral shop Monday, Balthazar on Thursday. That's when the rational voice decided revenge could be a small, swift, elegant instrument rather than an explosive scene. I wanted humiliation, but I also wanted to keep this legal, clean, and safe. I'm not a monster. There's a difference between making someone accountable and trying to ruin their life. I settled on an option that was satisfyingly public but also contained. I'd cancel his credit card. Not call the bank and produce a dramatic confrontation. Just use the app to turn the little rectangle of plastic into dead wood. If you've never canceled a card on someone else's account with one click, it might sound petty. That's the point. Petty can be surgical. I clicked Manage Card, Freeze, Confirm, Card Frozen. The app cheerfully popped up a message. Card paused. You can unfreeze anytime. I closed the app and went to pick up my kid from school like it was a Wednesday afternoon, and nothing had happened. I texted Ryan a simple, "Did you pack your charger?" Neutral, comfortable, that was important. The goal was not to catch him red-handed, though that would have been fun, but to let reality do the work. Let him call me, let the card decline, let the social shame follow. Let him face the person he'd chosen to humiliate. 2 evenings later, the plan came into motion, though I didn't know the exact time. I had my fingers in the family bank like a puppeteer with a very boring, very legal set of strings. Ryan had been flirty for weeks. New cologne, the sudden interest in tuxedo-level dinners, the way he started wearing an old jacket he never wore anymore. He told me he was going to a gala for an industry mixer and asked me not to. Wait up. My mother's intuition, because let's give her credit, saw right through the phrasing. Gala was a word used for my benefit. Gala was his code for, pick me up at this time, look like you're too busy to care. The night he didn't come home on time, I put on a cardigan and sat with a glass of wine. My phone webbed open to the banking app as if that would make it more real. Then the notifications started. Auth attempt declined. Balthazar Bistro. My little toast to myself fizzed. I felt a flush that wasn't just from the wine. My phone buzzed again. Then again. I let it ring. First text. "Hey, my card's not working. Can you check?" I wrote back, slow and sweet. That's weird. You must have run out of juice." He called. I let it go to voicemail. The call showed on hold, 2:14 a.m. The app pinged with another update. Last authorization attempt, 128 hours. Declined. 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 I don't recommend answering a husband who's desperate in public. There is an art to escalated nonchalance. I recorded myself, hands folded, a voice that might have been described as mildly amused. I answered, "You called?" He spoke fast, the kind of breathless pitch people use when they're trying to make the world believe they have everything under control. "Babe, the card declined. I don't know what's going on. Can you put it on your phone?" I said. "Your digital wallet?" No, it's my card. I don't have the backup one on me. Did you try the other one? No, it's gone. Panic in his voice that was not attractive. Panic is rarely attractive. Panic combined with being caught is a special kind of humiliating. I could have played dumb. I could have wrung my hands and suggested he call customer service. But there's a difference between being cruel and being theatrical. I chose theatrical. Oh my God, I said, slow and sympathetic. Maybe that's the bank protecting you. You've been doing a lot of unfamiliar purchases lately. Did you maybe connect the card to a stranger? My voice had the right shade of faux confusion, like someone discussing an unhappy toddler at the grocery store. He stammered, trying to craft a lie on the fly that involved Ed and work meetings. I could hear the clink of silverware in the background and the low murmur of a restaurant, the kind of sound that's both romantic and the ambient noise of upper-middle-class escapism. He pleaded, said, "Can you just call them, babe? Say you're me." And there it was. The choice on the table. He wanted me to rescue him from the consequences of his choices. I could have unpaused the card, called customer service, made everything go away like it was a pop-up ad. But where's the lesson in that? Where's the poetry? So I kept the card frozen, I let him fumble, I let him fail. That was the plan. Let him understand that when you hide behind someone else's money to be someone else, you become someone else, in the eyes of the people you're trying to impress. When I told the story later, people always asked how the side chick reacted. I won't lie. Part of me wanted to watch their heads explode in slow motion. But here's what happened. The first declined transaction was awkward, a micro-embarrassment. The waiter politely suggested another form of payment. He produced a second card, declined again. The third attempt was a debit card with no available funds. The woman across from him, Maya, by the way. Yes, I found her name within the week because social media is an easy snoop. Shifted in her chair. I imagined her perspective for a second because empathy isn't a trait that disappears with betrayal. You find the woman across from you and realize she is the person you would be if you'd gotten different choices. Mostly I wanted to be clear. I wasn't punishing some random woman for being the other person. I was addressing the person who chose a performance over his marriage. Maya reached into her purse. And here's where the story takes that delicious turn. She pulled out her own credit card. She didn't look triumphant or furious, more like someone silently annoyed at a canceled Netflix subscription. She handed her card to the waiter. He swiped and it went through. She paid without fanfare with a slight exhale as if she had just finished a transaction and moved on. The waiter was professional, smiling like a small man with a large repertoire of practiced courtesy. Ryan, however, was collapsing inward. You could see it. His jaw clenched, the charming smile replaced by a twitch. What Maya did in that moment is, I think, what people call social self-preservation. She didn't want the drama. She didn't want to be the woman with the man who couldn't pay. She just wanted dinner. But her paying for the meal, her covering his humiliation with her wallet, was the most savage punctuation mark I could have asked for. He had tried to impress her with our money. She ended up paying, out of her own funds, for the privilege of learning he was not as wealthy as he pretended. After she left, Ryan called me again. Desperation is not persuasive, it's embarrassing. He asked for me to come to the restaurant. He begged me to unfreeze the card. He asked me to just take care of it. He used the phrase, "please, babe," in the way men use it when they forget what their wives actually are capable of. I kept the card frozen. I told him on the phone that the card had been paused for suspicious activity and that the bank would require us to speak. I didn't tell him that the suspicious activity was, in fact, romantic dinner charges. Why would I? That's obvious. I let him stew. I let the silence rattle him. When he finally came home, late, disheveled, smelling faintly of perfume, and defeat, he expected a scene. Maybe I would scream, throw plates, demand proof. He expected a meltdown or a public meltdown. That's the story men who cheat often want because it's performative and absolving. They can leave and claim drama. Instead, I had done something he wasn't prepared for. I was calm. Deadly calm. On the kitchen table, there were printed screenshots. There was a neat stack of bank notifications, dates circled in red. There was a copy of the Instagram picture he had taken that matched the floral arrangement he'd described as a client gift, with the same weird lighting. There was, because I love theater, a single clean envelope with a few things inside, a list of his extra expenses for the last 6 months, neatly tallied, my handwritten note that said, "You can come explain this to me now or to a judge later." Humiliation is best served cold and with receipts. He tried to play it off with the old, "I didn't mean to hurt you" routine, turning hurt into an amortized expense he thought could be covered with words. The appeal of that routine is that it puts the act of restitution into the future, like a loan to be repaid with improved behavior. It assumes you'll accept an apology and continue paying. Not this time. Not after the pattern. I told him I had seen the messages. I told him I had the charges. I told him I had frozen the card. I told him I wanted him to leave. Those words felt like a scalpel. He looked at me like someone who had been enjoying a very comfortable dream and then woke up in an interrogation room. There's a misconception people have about public humiliation, that it's the worst part. It's not. The worst part for him, the part that made his comfortable veneer crack, was watching the choreography of his life fall apart in a quiet suburban kitchen where I kept a slow, calm tally. He asked me why I'd show him the receipts. "So you couldn't claim ignorance," I said. "You couldn't say you didn't know." He tried bargaining. "How about couples therapy?" he offered, like therapy is an eraser. "Let's go to counseling," he said, as if attending a room where strangers get paid to mediate would absolve him of the specific choice to spend our money on someone else's dinner. There is a point in every drama where the protagonist must decide their terms. Mine were simple. I wanted the truth, and I wanted control over what came next. I started the process of separating our finances. I moved money to accounts he didn't have access to. I made sure the mortgage payment was on auto pay and into an account only I could reach. I called a lawyer, not to immediately sue or wage war, but to understand what to do with the mortgage, the car, the retirement accounts. I did the adult thing. I made a plan. People ask later if filing for divorce felt vindictive. It didn't. Filing for divorce felt like signing for my freedom. Revenge is sweet, but reclaiming your life is sweeter. The humiliation at Balthazar was a moment, an event that made the betrayal visible in a public way. The administrative steps that followed were about safety, dignity, and making sure our children, if we had them, this is hypothetical in some retellings, were protected from financial instability. This is not a crime story. It's an accountability story. There were other things that happened, smaller but sharp. His coworkers, who had always liked his showmanship, started asking if he was doing okay, because apparently a man who can't pay for his own dinner doesn't inspire confidence in client relationships. Old friends sent cringy texts apologizing for not having seen it. A family member asked me quietly if I was sure about confronting him publicly. I smiled and said yes, because some spoons are worth giving up, some are not. And then there was the delicious petty cherry on top. A week after the Balthazar fiasco, I received a message from some mutual acquaintance. "By the way," the message went, "Maya says the guy she was with that night is, well, not as flush as she thought." I smiled. That's what happens when you bring a cardboard version of yourself to a live setting. Someone else pays, and the truth folds in on itself. I know it seems small to some people. A credit card canceled, a woman paying for her own dinner, a man coming home to receipts and not the usual surrender. But here's the thing. Humiliation is a currency, and I spent mine carefully. I didn't get physical. I didn't throw a glass at him. I did something that mattered. I used the tools I had, legal, financial, procedural, to make sure that his choices had consequences, and I ensured that the consequences were visible enough to be instructive. For weeks after, people asked me if I felt guilty. I didn't. I felt a complicated mix of sorrow and exhilaration. Sorrow for the years I thought were shared, the bargains I had accepted, the small compromises labeled for harmony. Exhilaration because the playbook had been turned on its head. I had been the predictable one in the story, the woman who manages the accounts and keeps a tidy ledger. And that predictability let me do something wildly unpredictable. I protected myself. I don't recommend plotting revenge as a lifelong strategy. It's exhausting and petty, and there's always a chance you'll regret the exact wording of a text 2 hours later. But I do recommend clarity. If someone chooses to build a secret life, let them be accountable for the real bills that secret. Life racks up. If your partner believes your relationship is merely theater, don't give them the props. When the dust settled, people had opinions. Some praised me, some called me cold. Many people asked if I would have done anything differently. Honestly, maybe I would have told him earlier that I cared less about the flirty texts and more about the pattern of using our shared life for a private show. Maybe I would have tried to ask more direct questions sooner. But humans are complicated. Patterns don't always reveal themselves overnight. Sometimes they need a push, a small public reveal, to make the personal consequences visible. My lawyers and I worked on the paperwork with the kind of weary efficiency that marks modern endings. There were meetings, signatures, the familiar awkwardness of dividing things once shared. But through it all, I noticed one curious thing: the relief that came from not being surprised anymore. Surprise is exhausting. Knowing is exhausting in a different way, but it's actionable. It lets you decide. People ask me if I would do it again. When the question is framed like that, the answer is yes. I would make sure I was safe and protected. I would make sure the children, if there had been any, were stable, that the mortgage was secure, that the retirement accounts were secure. The messy, creative revenge had a place in my story, because sometimes narrative closure tastes better with a little theatricality. But the real work was the practical, tedious, unsexy stuff. Changing passwords, moving money, telling the truth, and because the internet loves a twist, here's another one. After all the paperwork and talk, Ryan tried to make a symbolic grand gesture. I'll make things right. Showing up with coffee and the kind of awkward sincerity that reads like a press release at a funeral. I let the doorman take the coffee. I let the gesture be a thing he could keep. I told him simply, "You chose the performance. I choose my peace." One of the hardest parts afterwards was realizing how many women told me, privately, versions of the same story. They didn't want revenge. Most of them wanted to be believed. They wanted someone to say that the pattern mattered. They wanted to know they were not alone, not because misery loves company, but because solidarity softens the edge of betrayal. I started getting messages, long, shameful, honest, and I felt less like a protagonist and more like a person who had inadvertently opened a door for others to walk through. So what's the moral? It's not always freeze your husband's card. It's not punish publicly. The moral is simpler. Be aware of the tools you have to protect yourself, and don't underestimate the quiet power of small, decisive acts. When someone treats a relationship like a stage and your life like their prop, you don't have to applaud. You can walk off set. I'll be honest. The pleasure in telling this story now is a combination of catharsis and a little smugness. I am smarter now about the ways people perform for an audience. I am wiser about the lines I won't cross for anyone's approval. I remain, to my chagrin, still a person who loves a good spreadsheet, but I'm also a person who will now invest in separate accounts and change passwords more often. It's boring, but it is also peace. Before I sign off, would you have done the same? Would you have exposed him publicly or quietly ensured your future safety? Would you have frozen the card, mid-date, or waited to see if he came home? Tell me what you would have done. If you've been through something similar, how did you handle it? I read every comment. I respond when I can. If you liked this story, please hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more tales that are equal. Parts awkward and satisfying. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.